Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. My name is Gregg Dedrick. It's my wife, Shelley.
Hello.
We are founders of Iron Bell Ministries, and we're delighted that you joined in today. And today is really just part two of a discussion that we started last week around navigating conflict in your marriage or in your close relationships. And we wanted to pick up where we left off. And if you remember, if you watched last week, we talked about the notion that conflict is not necessarily in and of itself bad. Now, everybody, when I say the word conflict, most of us go like,
Right.
Do you like conflict?
No, I think of avoidance.
Yes, okay. So we're both like that. We'd rather avoid it. There are some people who enjoy conflict, but you don't want to be around them. Just kidding. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to have conflict in your marriage. And in fact, John Gottman, who we often quote and use his material, he has determined through scientific research that there's no correlation between the amount of conflict you have in your relationship and the happiness that each spouse would say they have in that relationship. So it's not about your conflict. What is really critical is how do you handle that conflict? How do you resolve it? How do you repair from it? That's what's critical. So we're going to cover, last week we covered a topic we called the Four Horsemen, another John Gottman term. And we talked about the toxins that you can bring into the conflict. If you didn't see that one, I really highly recommend it, not because we're tremendous presenters, because we're not. It was really more about that content is really critical content. So we encourage you to go back and look at that because it helps you really avoid the pitfalls of damaging your relationship during a conflict. Today we're going to shift a little bit. We're going to talk about a second topic. And really what we're going to talk about is how do you resolve conflict? How do you solve the conflict that you have? How do you live with and deal with the conflict that you have as a married couple? And every married couple, with Shelley and I do a lot of marriage coaching, every married couple has a little bit different dance that they have to go through to work through and around conflict. And it's different based upon the dynamics of the individual. So we're going to give you some principles for thinking about that, and then you guys can use those principles to really self-diagnose and help each other through conflict. So the first thing I would talk about is that there are two types of conflict that you can have in your relationship. And it's really important to identify which kind of conflict you have as you're going through conflict or as you go look through the conflicts in your life, because the way you deal with them is completely different. And in fact, it's opposite in some ways. All right, and these are the two kind of conflicts. One is called a solvable conflict, and we're going to talk about what that means. And one is called a perpetual conflict. And the reason it's important to determine what kind of conflict you're facing is under a solvable conflict, what you're going to be doing is working together to figure out how to resolve it. It's solvable, so you can resolve it and come up with an answer that you can both agree to. Even if it's not your most desired outcome, you agree on them. The other kind of conflict is rooted in some very different things, and it's called perpetual. And the important thing to understand here is you're not trying to resolve it or solve it.
Right.
By definition, a perpetual conflict is one that you'll probably have throughout your entire relationship, and you want to find ways to cope and deal with that. And so let me just start with that. And what I thought we'd do is start going through and just helping you identify perpetual versus a solvable conflict, and then we can give you some ideas and strategies for how to deal with those. Mm-hmm. So let's start with the solvable conflict. And the thing about a solvable conflict is this. It's typically situational. Something crops up, maybe hasn't cropped up before, or crops up and you haven't dealt with it before. And many times it's about expectations or situations that get thrust on you, requests or demands, and it creates conflict. Mm-hmm. One we deal with a lot when we do a lot of marriage coaching is just expectations, right? And one of the examples that I think is easily understood by many people is kind of the different expectations as you get married that different parts of the family have on you that can create conflict, right?
Right, you bring in traditions. My family had certain traditions throughout the year. Gregg's family had certain traditions throughout the year, and we just assumed that as the traditions happened that we're going to do them the way my family had done them, or we're going to do them the way that Gregg had done them, or things that personally I enjoy doing or would want to do. I'm just assuming Gregg would want to do that, or we would implement those in our life. And so we really don't find out what these are until we actually do the dance. We're married, and the days and years
Surprise.
are going by, and we're like, well, of course we're going to go to my grandmother's my mother's every Sunday for dinner after church, because we've always done that, and that's a great thing to do. It's great for family, and why wouldn't you want to do that? And he's like, well, I really don't want to go to your mother's every Sunday for dinner. I don't mind going maybe every other or once a month, but can we talk about it? That's a solvable problem. It's something that we can talk about. Just because I see the benefit of it every Sunday doesn't mean he's right or wrong, or I'm right or wrong, but that's something we could discuss and work it out to really kind of what works and meets both of our needs, if you will, right?
Yeah, we've done that. I remember a young couple, this was really plaguing him because she wanted him to come over. His mother-in-law and father-in-law wanted them there every Sunday, and we literally worked out a schedule with them.
And lots of times she was actually afraid to approach her mother. And lots of times we're afraid to say something to our moms and dads, like, well, my goodness, what would they think? And that's going to cause more conflict, and I want to avoid that. I can't say that to my parents. You're going to make me say it to my parents. You realize what that's going to cause? And that was stopping her from really understanding you have your own marriage now. You need to honor each other as best as you can with all kinds of things. And she needed the courage to just say, you know what, I love you. I can see your point. All right, I'm going to go talk to my parents and see if every other Sunday would work. And she did. And it worked. And they did.
Yeah, so it's about confronting, those things, and then working on a solution where you can agree on something that works for both of you. So, a lot of times these are just around expectations. Conflict comes up because, all of a sudden he's walking out on Saturday morning with his golf clubs. She's standing there and said, wait a minute, we haven't connected all week. I didn't know you were golfing. All right. So there's a problem just around communication. So, that's solvable. You can say, hey, every Thursday night or whatever it is, let's talk about the weekend and what expectations you have for your weekend and the expectations I have. So you kind of look at that situation, dissect it, and say, here's how we can avoid it. So you can actually problem solve those kinds of things to look at how to avoid them, or when you're in the middle of them, say, hey, here's how we can resolve this. So a lot of times it's around expectations. And as I said, the goal would be to say, how do we resolve this? How do we come to a mutual agreement that this is a way we can move forward, and then kind of honor each other's input in that, but come to some compromise that you can live with. So it's about compromise and resolution.
Right. I'm smiling because I'm thinking, even though it's not Christmas, I have to pick out the perfect Christmas tree. And that's something that Gregg has obliged me in, but when we used to live in Connecticut, we would go and pick out our own tree. We'd take the kids and we'd go, and he'd have his saw, and he'd be over there, how about this one? And I'd be like, no. He'd be like, how about this one? I'd be, no. And finally, he just was quiet and just would walk behind me with his saw. But he knew that was, I need to let Shelley, she's got to have the perfect tree. For some reason, I don't get it. It's important to her. But, he could have gotten patient and just said, would you just pick a tree? Or he could have just said, we're going with that one, and put his foot down. But he loves me, and he knows how important it is to me. That was solvable. That's a little minor, but sometimes those little minor things are irritations.
So those are solvable problems, a lot around expectations. They happen around scheduling. They happen around the function of life, where you don't communicate certain things. You don't plan ahead. You don't resolve what that conflict was about, in terms of, okay, how do we avoid that in the future so they can plague you. But those with the right communication and respect and problem solving, you can get to a good compromise solution, right? Another type of problem is called a perpetual problem. And this is much more deep-seated. And again, the goal is not to solve these. It's learning to cope. So let me just tell you a story about our counselor. Some of you have heard this story before, but it really best demonstrates the definition of a perpetual problem. And our marriage counselor that we went to when we were really in a pit, which I encourage everybody to have a coach or a counselor in your marriage, somebody with outside eyes that could speak into it, that you trust and that loves you both. And so as we were going through this, he was describing, and he said that he's a psychologist, he works around a lot of high-intensity kinds of occupations, senior pastors, ER doctors, police officers, firefighters, and he also is in mixed martial arts himself, and he has a gun, and he goes to shooting range and has a target thing in his backyard. His wife is a complete pacifist. You should never fight wars, raise your fists. So, and guns are not to be owned or manufactured. So you can see that this is a perpetual problem. But if there's no way they're going to convince each other that their perspective is right. These are deeply held beliefs and values. So they've learned to compromise in terms of allowing the other to believe what they believe, and then working around, maybe he doesn't shoot, when she's home or something, or certain days of the week, and she plans a timeout, or whatever the case may be in that sense. Or the guns are not stored in sight, they're locked away. There are ways to work around it, but you don't try to convince the other person they're wrong. So these are a lot about things that are deeply held values. Also personalities come into this. You think about distinct personalities that
right, yeah.
can't get along.
Absolutely. There are some personalities that are very they are really very rule based. They follow the rules. You don't bend the rules. You don't break the rules. There's really no gray area, and so it's kind of like this.
Black and white.
And they come into the relationship with that, and that can cause a lot of issues. And there are also sometimes there's personalities that have
versus
very
somebody
deep.
the partner who's not rule based,
Right.
more flexible,
Right,
than
that'd be me.
squishy.
And not that you're rule based,
Yeah.
but I'm more flexible like that. Yeah. See that the whole personality is another dynamic you put into all kinds of things.
Yeah, but in that, then what happens is, let's say one person's really messy and one person's really neat.
Yeah.
Right? And how do you deal with that? And what we've
Right.
learned is that personalities are really they are ingrained in us, and you're not going to change that.
Right.
And
You're not going to change
make
that
them,
person is systematic, strives for perfection, loves his world orderly, everything has a place. You're not going to change that.
Yeah.
That's going to be a perpetual situation.
Right.
So,
and the person who's more inclined to be messy can work around that. You can compromise some things, but you're not going to make them a neat freak.
you've tried
Orderly.
with me.
I have tried, and then I realized that was not the thing
And
to
then
do.
I do.
That's
I
why we're
tried for a
giving this
while.
talk.
I tried for a while to. My one daughter would set up systems for me. She'd come in and she'd clean out my pantry. She's like, "Mom, this is date. It's like 2020. It would be like 2016 in there. Like I didn't know it was even in there." And she'd have everything. The baking here, the whatever, blah blah blah. It looks beautiful, and I'd open it. I'd be like, "This is great. I can do this." And every time I'd open it, I get stressed, thinking, "I don't know if I can follow this too long." Before you know, it's a mess. But to her, it made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I'm a little more messy. And for me to try, I could try, but eventually, it's just how my brain doesn't work.
Yeah. So I think personalities is one of the big topics where you get perpetual conflict, because you want the other person to have the same personality that you did, even though you probably fell in love with them, because their personality is completely opposite. What happens is those things become irritants. So you really have to have grace with one another. Allow that person to be who they are meant to be. It doesn't mean
It's an
that
excuse.
you don't or that you
Right.
don't bend, but deep down, don't think you're going to change, Harry to be a neat freak if he's not, or convince Jane that she really needs to be, more organized than she is.
Like Gregg wants to be on time. For him, I don't know why, but it's very, very important that you're on time. I mean, like, on time. And I'm like, a minute? Could we be like a minute, late or something? And no. It's just, it's something that's very deep seats, a value that you're on time. I have tried to change that. I've tried to bend that, but it's a perpetual in our
Right.
marriage. So I'm more flexible and easygoing. So I'm like, okay, I'm the one that it's important to him. I want to honor you with that. So whenever we go anywhere, I would say, wouldn't you say, I'm on time. I'm on time for him because it's a big deal for him. It's not such a big deal for me. And so I want to honor you by, that's something that's really, really important.
Yeah.
So I am on time for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we go together somewhere, you're on time. Sometimes you'll say, hey, this is not something we have to be on time for. It doesn't matter, and then that'll relax it, and I can bend. I'm going to talk a little bit more about then some of the things that cause those perpetual problems. So first of all, this is the biggest cause of conflict in your marriage typically over the long run. About 70% of conflict in your marriage is over perpetual conflict. So you should pay attention to the kinds of things that you have and what those involve. So again, they typically revolve around your difference in personalities, or maybe the difference in the values you have, deeply held beliefs, around how clean the house should be, around how you spend money. There's a category of things, whether or not we should have children. And if we do have children, whether or not they should be raised with a strict discipline or with lax discipline, right? Housework, whether a house needs to be spotless or whether it's like it just needs to be so we're not killing ourselves as we walk through it and nobody's getting sick by living here. Whether we should raise our children Catholic or Protestant, or how we use our time and how we use our money, two big ones. I think money was meant to be spent to enjoy our life. The other person, I think money was meant to be saved so that you have a good future life. And both of those are value perspectives, right? How we use our time, both of those are value perspective. Being on time can be very important. Being flex on time can be very important. So the goal, again, is not to have you convince the other person that you're right. The goal is to say, I understand that's the way you're wired. I understand that's your deeply held belief. Now, how can we, so you validate that in each other and give it value. I understand why being flexible can be very helpful. You become much less of a slave to, a watch. You give yourself the flexibility to do something that's more important than being a few minutes late. There's value to that. But now then you say, let's work through how we can both work this out in a way that we can resolve it in a way that gets us through coping with that conflict in our life, not eliminating it. And when that happens, what happens is this. You can start to bring humor into it. Okay, one of the examples that I would use is Shelley tends to be at certain times forgetful. And it has nothing to do with us growing older. This has been since our honeymoon, where she forgot to.
We won't say that.
Yeah, put the reservation in on the suite, but that was good.
But he said it anyways.
So it gives you that. But so we've been dealing with this our whole life. So early on, that would have really perturbed me, right? Because she's forgetful about things. And now I'll give you an example. Just I think last year we were sitting at our house and she was walking down to the Iron Bell Barn to meet somebody for a one-on-one coaching session, and she had a bunch of materials with her. And as she walked down to halfway down there, I'm watching her walk down. All of a sudden I see her pick up her phone. I know what's coming. I know what's coming. My phone is going to light up and she's going to say, I forgot my materials and so-and-so is on the way. Could you bring them down to me? So I pick up the phone and say, you forgot your materials and so-and-so is coming. Can I bring them down to you? And we start laughing.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way. And the difference then between our relationship when I respond that way, I know it's a bit of an inconvenience for me, but it's actually kind of funny, right? Because I understand I knew it was coming and we start to attach humor to it. Or where she will know quirks about me and she'll make a joke about them, right? And so maybe the fact that I can be talkative around the house and I'm talking out loud, and she'll say, I don't need to be in on your conversation that you're having with yourself, and she'll laugh or something. So if you can not only understand the differences and understand the reasons that they're attached to those different people, but then give each other grace and add humor to it, it turns those differences into something that can connect you rather than drive you apart. If you keep chipping away at the fact that that person will not agree with you, then it's going to be a problem.
Right. And you could have said, knowing that I forgot my material, because I really do try hard to be buttoned up, and sometimes just I am most of the time. But
most of the time you are.
I mean, you could have really made me feel bad.
Right.
You could have said, when are you going to learn? I mean, like, what is wrong with you? You're going to a meeting you have to have these papers. How in the world could you forget them?
Right.
You could have scolded me,
Right.
and that would have, but knowing that I have these tendencies,
Right.
I am trying to work on them. You gave me grace,
Right.
and also you served me and just loved me and was gentle, and that really made me feel really
Right.
good.
Right.
And that's a big difference.
Yeah. Then that leads to a greater connectedness. Then
Emotional
the
intimacy.
opportunity for you to become more connected emotionally.
Right.
So those are some of the big areas. And then here's how you can know you're in gridlock, like you're stuck in a perpetual conflict. I'm just going to read some of these off, and hopefully they'll. If you're in there, you'll find yourself. If after the discussion in that conflict you feel rejected, or if it's like the same movie over again, like Groundhog Day, it's the same discussion, the same outcome. Here we are, and at the end of that, you're more entrenched. You feel less likely to budge. You feel like your opinion's even more right. We're at greater frustration and greater hurt. Through these things. The humor and affection is gone. It's actually the opposite. You feel emotionally disconnected, and that starts to create a gap between the two of you in the way you relate. That's how you know. So that's the clue that you're in a perpetual conflict, and to pull them apart. One of the things that was interesting is there was an example that about somebody you were just talking to me this morning about a couple where it wasn't about the issue, it was really about trust and everything. Oh, in the car.
We're in the car, and I was reading this issue, and I was like, sounds like Gregg and I in the car. But, Gregg is really a good driver. He really, really is a good driver. But, I don't know, as he gets a little older, I feel like he's more impatient, and I think he thinks everybody's out to get him.
No, not get me, get in my way.
Whatever. And I'm kind of a little nervous Nelly in the car, and I'm like, honey, could you slow down? Not that you drive so fast. Could you slow down or whatever? It just, we kind of have this spat that is constant. It's like we just never seem to I'm telling him the same thing and whatever.
We have our rehearsed scripts.
But nothing changes, right? So, but I feel like at the root of that is that I'm not trusting his instincts. Like, I'm not sure what he's going to do. And that frightens me. Also, growing up, my mom and dad in the car, we were subject to some things that were, unsafe, and it's really scared me. And so sometimes I feel unsafe, and I feel like I don't trust what he's going to do. And most times, if he doesn't do what I'm asking, I don't feel like he really hears me or that he cares. Those are deep. I don't trust you. I don't feel like you care about me. You're not listening. I'm afraid, but you don't. It doesn't seem to matter. And those are deep-rooted things that are sometimes things we've brought from our past that are playing out now that are on the table.
So we've kind of rooted out and found ways to cope and compromise to work through most of our perpetual conflicts in our marriage. This is one that still kind of keeps, continues to crop up. We haven't mastered yet, so it was a good one for us to talk about.
I'll just drive.
Yes. So either she drives or we drive separately. That's a good coping mechanism. But here's the thing that I wanted to bring up. Oftentimes what's underneath these things is something, as Shelley said, it's much deeper than that. It's not about the driving. It's about me understanding maybe some fears she has. It's about me building trust so that she can feel good. It's about something deeper, or me feeling like, don't you trust me? So that's why it becomes a perpetual conflict. We were marriage coaching a couple a while ago, a long time ago, and what we found is one of the things that was a perpetual conflict is that she wanted to wash the car every weekend. And in going out and washing the car, she'd just start washing the car, and he would go about his business. Well, come to find out, that was a major issue for her. And it was causing her pain when she would say, okay, will you come help me? And he'd be like, no, I've got something else to do. What was behind all that was, in her family, every Saturday, Dad went out and washed the car, and the whole family came out. It was a time of emotional connection. They'd have fun doing it. It was about everybody joined in to help. And so essentially what he was doing was he thought was just, hey, I have work to do, or I'm watching the game, or I know you love to wash your car. Go for it. I'll cheer you on or bring you a glass of water. But he was actually kind of stomping on a lot of her dreams and understanding of what family connection looked like, a major tradition. And so it wasn't about the car wash. The car wash represented the opportunity to connect emotionally with her husband and her family.
And one of her love languages could have been quality time recreational.
Yeah.
And so she felt loved when they're doing a recreation, if you will, and he's joining in. That makes her feel loved. And so they were just missing that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the point here is to take the time and energy to understand what's behind the driving thing, what's behind the car wash, what's behind the being late understanding, or what's behind the way you discipline your children, and then try to give respect and honor to that without convincing each other. Because when you do, you're saying, I don't like the way you're wired, the way you think, and the way you believe, and I need to change you in order to be in this relationship. Instead of saying, hey, I value your perspective, I don't agree with it, that's okay, we'll find ways to work through that. And that's the most important thing.
That's good.
So with that, I think what I would encourage you to do is take a look at the conflicts you're having and kind of talk through whether you think they are solvable, things that arise around expectations, around scheduling, around expectations other people have on you, and then work to resolve them. And plan ahead and try to avoid them, and then when you're in them, resolve them. On the perpetual conflicts, the things that have a deeper underlying value, what I would encourage you to do is just talk about those things, find ways to cope, don't try to convince the other person they're wrong, don't demean them because they have those values or beliefs, and try to work through them.
That's good.
Yeah. So with that, we're going to go ahead and pray for you guys, and then end the podcast. So, Father, we just thank you for this time. We thank you that you are the God who is sovereign, who brought each and every couple together who's listening to this. Lord, that you designed them as to come together as one, and that you want to bring unity and intimacy between them and between you and them. Father, I pray that you would just enlighten the eyes of their heart to see, that their spirit would just inside of them be enlightened to know what you are doing in them right now, in these different areas of conflict, that you want to use conflict not to be something that destroys their relationship, but one that can actually make it stronger. And so, Father, we just thank you for this time. We bless those people. We say we love you in Jesus' name.